Because when you have passion about something, you're willing to put in the work.
I would say work ethic is what builds the boat. If you were sailing through like the ocean of language learning, I would say work ethic is what keeps the boat rowing. Passion is what makes you enjoy the process. And I think that's what, at its core, language learning does for people like us.
So, and I agree. I wholeheartedly agree with what you just said. But I'm thinking right now, how many languages would you say that you know on a surface level?
On a surface level, do you mean as in like basic greetings, introductions,
Yeah.
how to, I would say 7.
Okay, 7. So would you say that your framework for learning the other languages is based on always English, or some of them are based on other languages?
Ooh, I would say if they were Latin based, it was based off of English, unless it was close enough to Spanish. With Brazilian Portuguese, I would spend my time almost kind of double fisting languages in a way. So I would do my Brazilian Portuguese. I would do my Brazilian Portuguese, not necessarily languages, but my study sessions. I would make my notes in Spanish as much as I could. That way, it kind of helped me on 2 fronts, but it also reinforced my knowledge of English because my brain already was in translation mode
Okay.
from Spanish.
So I would say that too. The learning process that I like to talk about is like the accumulative learning process, and then also like the correlations and connections that we make in order to commit stuff to long-term memory. Now, I know that's a lot.
Yes.
And so I use Spanish as my baseline to get this or English as my baseline to connect to Spanish because we have to.
Yes.
And then, but I think it's interesting because something you mentioned earlier is that kids see things.
Yes.
So when we're learning English, we're connecting sight to then produce audible sounds in order to produce language. And then our second, then for our second language, we're using our first language as the framework. And then for me, for Spanish, I can use Spanish as the framework for Portuguese because there were so many cognates. I think the difficulty I have is, well, the difficulty that I had was when I was taking Hebrew lessons. It's that one, I can no longer use the Roman alphabet. So that was frustrating.
Ooh.
And then having to, I remember I had a Hebrew teacher for a while, and he was just like, we're going to spend an ungodly amount of time on just the alphabet. And I was pissed because I was like, I feel like those experiences also translate to life lessons.
True.
Because I was so used to doing things quick in a hurry and speeding through it that like when I had to spend 2 weeks on just the alphabet, that humbled me.
Oh, absolutely. I would say the same. I would say the same thing for Turkish for me, because like Hebrew, I definitely agree, rough. But I would say, as Americans, language learning is very much spoon-fed. If you're going from I would say like the big 3, which would be Spanish, Italian, and German. Because
Why did you couple Italian with Spanish and German?
Because Spanish, for the most part, most Americans have a little bit of a baseline desire to learn, but not as much. German, because a lot of Americans, for some reason or another, I don't know why, but a lot of Americans have this like obsession with either Germany or traveling to Germany or learning German. And a lot of people in middle school, high school took a German class because they didn't want to take a Spanish class, which is a whole nother thing. And then with Italian, a lot of people's parents took Italian or traveled to Italy. That is something that is that seemed to be more of a common language to take in the what's called the late 60s, early 70s when it was offered, because Spanish wasn't necessarily seen as something good to learn. And so the reason why I call those the big three is because Spanish is the closest thing we have from an American English perspective.
Okay.
Italian, because it's just far enough. It's just different enough to where you do have to spend time learning different things like the personal pronouns and learning from a dialectal standpoint German, because if you are learning a first language, German and Italian tend to weed out a lot of people that maybe wanted to learn a language, but were not prepared for the time commitment that it might need.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Right.
But for me, answering your question with Turkish, I felt the same way you did about Hebrew, but I knew that I was serious about learning languages because I didn't have that direct translation. I started to have to pay more attention to context and the absence of certain objects, foods, names in Turkish culture. And that's a big part of language learning. And as a result, I started to take more notes of, oh, if I'm using this language, I have to think as if I am living in that country.
Facts. And I feel like that's another part that individuals don't understand, is that you have to conceptualize the culture while learning that language. So that's why immersion is viewed as a significantly effective process for that.
Right.
Because like you said, the reason I believe that knowing the culture is important is because if you're not doing that, then you're committing what's called a translation error, where you're taking rules from I say rules, it's a grammatical term, but rules culturally and grammatically, you're taking that based on the only thing you have, which is your own culture and worldview, and you're trying to apply that to another culture. So like the idiomatic expression that you used at the beginning of this, if we translate that literally, it doesn't make sense. But if we have the proper framework from which we're looking at it at, which is knowledge about that person's culture, customs, and those things, then it allows us to see things through that lens. Yes. So just knowing the words without knowing the culture and without having experience interacted with those individuals, it's very difficult to completely internalize and conceptualize. Oh my God. I feel like I just nerded out.
Yes, but no, I have a perfect example, because I just had this conversation with my Spanish tutor, and I just recently found out that I was his first Spanish student from the States.
Oh, okay.
I did not know that, but I had this whole moment. But basically, we were talking about movies, and I was talking about how my primary way of studying when it comes to Spanish is I love watching TV shows and movies without the subtitles, and then going back and watching it again with the subtitles to see what matches up.
Subtitles is my best friend.
Like, I think for subtitles, for some people it really works and it sticks. For some people, sometimes it's used as a crutch.
So I agree and disagree. The main thing that I agree on is that it works.
Yes.
The main thing I would say that it distracts from is because it is a visual, and I noticed that a lot of times I was not paying attention to the interactions, manners that are going on in the movie because of looking at the visual of the words.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know how this works for you, because all of our brains are different, especially nowadays, but normally I write down whatever I'm learning, because when you write things down, you participate in the encryption process in your brain. And so a lot of times when I'm recalling a word, I can visually see it
Really?
in my mind's eye of like, okay, yeah, because like I'm reading it off of the paper. So I don't know if there's a way to accurately explain what that language of recall looks like for you, but when you're stuck on a word, for example, and you're trying to recall it, where are you looking from? Are you looking from somewhere you wrote it down? Are you looking from where you wrote it in the dictionary? Or is it just
I would say from what I was watching at the time.
at the time or the context in which you heard the word? Okay. Yeah, I had those moments as well.
Like, I know there's a lot of context that I would remember a word because of what I was watching at the time. And then I would be like, okay, when they said that this is what
So it's experience related.
very much.
So I feel like that expounds upon our ideas that we talk about on how like to implement a better language learning process.
Yes.
Because I definitely think that for those reasons, like tying experience with the language learning process is essential. I feel like I don't have the science to prove it, but I feel like that would make memory recall more effective.
I agree. Before I lose my thought, that context thing with how you remember words or how you remember like phrases, or the cultural context being equally as important as the speaking practice and pronunciation practice. For example, my favorite movie, The Emperor's New Groove.
Oh, I love
There is a part.
Wait, I'm gonna be ADHD. Do you know any words in Arabic?
No.
Can I teach you one?
Go for it.
Hi,
Hi.
marahaba.
Merkaba.
No, marahaba.
Marakaba.
I could be saying it wrong too.
Wait,
Or you could say kefahalik. How are you?
how are you?
Kefahalik.
Kefahalik? Ooh, okay.
And to reply good, you say tamam.
Tamam. Okay. And then when you say hi, marhaba, what is that?
That's just hi.
Okay. In Turkish, merhaba.
Oh, merhaba.
Yes.
Okay, so I might not be saying with the
That is really interesting.
accent.
That's so cool.
And then to say you speak a little Arabic, ana barif shweya Arabi.
Ana barif, ana baya,
Ana barif,
ana barif,
ana barif,
ana barif,
shweya
shweya,
Arabi.
Arabi.
Yeah, ana barif shweya Arabi.
Ooh.
Ani ismi tamara, ana barif shweya Arabi. I learned that from the films that wrote. Shut up.
I know that's right. I know that's right. Yo, but like, you see how crazy that is, and like things cross over too. But cultural context, with The Emperor's New Groove, there's a part in it where two of the characters are walking through the swamp, and they fall asleep, and the villain wakes up, and one of the characters says, "Hey, I have something to tell you," and she wakes up and she's like, "This had better be good." And at that time, and like most American kids see that.
Wait, can you do that again?
This had better be good. And like, you know that this is a person who does not want to be woken up, and she's saying like, "This had better be good, what you have to wake me up for." And that's just what you see. As an American kid, that makes sense. If you grew up in Latin America, you couldn't quite say that. It doesn't convey the same message. Now, this kind of lends itself more to interpretation, but for Spanish-speaking kids, they use a different reference because culturally, American grandparents or elders, they can just say, "This had better be good." For Latin grandmothers, they, in that time, had their eyes on a few famous singers. And the translation, not the translation, but the interpretation that that Disney used was Será como Ricky.
Será como rey.
Yes. And that was a reference to the most famous singer at the time, Ricky Martin, which many Latin women loved to death when this movie came out. So for Latin grandmothers, hearing a Latin elder say like, this had better be Ricky, because why did you wake me up? Like, why did you disturb my peace? Culturally, you don't disturb your elders for a Latin household. For American households, a lot of stuff goes. But that was a very specific context. Culturally speaking, an American would lack that reference of Ricky Martin, because he was not as important to an American as he was to someone with a Latin background.
Okay. Thank you for that knowledge. Christian, you just taught me something. But all right, Christian. So we're probably going to have a part 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to definitely have you back on, because you made this so much more enjoyable for me. And, we could probably talk for hours. But we always end the episode of deep dive dialogues with a deep original quote. You can do it in English or in Spanish or in both. Actually, I want one in English for sure.
Okay.
Deep original quote.
A deep original quote. Okay. Now I'm trying to think what would be a really good way to like summarize how I feel about it. I would say, okay, there's like 2.
Okay.
The first one would be, I would say communication is key. Try to open as many doors as you can.
Okay.
I would say that would be the first one. And then the second one would be, for all of the things you want to say, there is just as many people that want to hear it.
Oh, I like that.
I think that's the best way to
put it together.
Yeah. Ooh, that was actually kind of good, y'all. I know. I'm like, okay.
All right. Well, you heard it here first. This is Christian Pitts, and he has accomplished learning Spanish. So I think we would like to say, if we could do it, then you could do it too.
Absolutely.
All right. We'll catch you next time. Bye.